Everyone. We'll get started in a couple minutes as folks continue to hop on. In the meantime, we'd love to know who's all in the room with us. If you could introduce yourself in the chat box with your name, your pronouns, and what city you're based from, and also add what brings you here today. And then we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, I love to get us started now. So welcome everyone again. My name is Simone Frank. I'm a communication specialist at the UCLA Labor Center, and welcome to Photography for the Revolution workshop series, part 2, building a worker-centered project. And today's workshop is led by master photographer and journalist David Bacon. And if you missed our first workshop last week, we do have it recorded on our YouTube channel at UCLA Labor. And it was basically really a great introduction on the politics of social justice photography and how those of us in this field of work can better analyze photo context and move people to action. So definitely recommend to check that out. And so today we'll basically be focusing on photography and oral history and how those two can work together to document people's lived experiences. And then we'll also look at a case study to help us connect these learnings to broader community issues. And then later we'll also hear from a few guest speakers that will present and share with us some photos that they'd like to share with the group today. And for those presenting, our hosts will give you a heads up to ensure folks' slides are ready. And before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping things. As this is a participatory space, we would really love to encourage folks to use the hand raise feature located on the menu bar at the bottom of your screen to speak your thoughts and questions aloud. And while our presenters are speaking, folks will be muted, but please don't be shy and raise your hand. And then also please utilize the chat, ask questions or add thoughts about anything that comes up for you throughout this workshop. And then lastly, if you're experiencing any technical issues or just need assistance, just send us a message to the host and one of us will be able to help. And so without further ado, I'd love to pass the mic to David Bacon.
Well, thank you very much, Simone. Thank you to all the people who have made this possible. Maisha, Simone, Emily, Jana, really, thanks. And thank you all for being here. So I am going to share screen and let me do that here. Okay. Okay, I'm requesting sharing here. It says here that sharing is not turned on. So can somebody?
1 second. Let me turn it on for you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Very good, excellent, okay. So away we go. So today, again, we're going to talk about a worker-centered project, what it is, and or the idea of it, behind it. And also, as Simone was saying, if you have questions or things that you want to say, use that raise your hand thing, and we'll kind of try to incorporate questions and comments as we go. And I'm going to talk with your help, for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, leave plenty of time for question and answers at the end. And then we have a number of people who have signed up to share images. Some of them are old friends and some of them are new friends, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And so we'll try and have plenty of time at the end. What we asked people to do was to come up with 3 to 5 images and spend 5 minutes talking about them. And then maybe we'll have a couple of minutes for people to respond and then go on to the next person. So I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, okay, here we go. So what is a worker-centered project? First of all, it's a project. In other words, it's more than just a single photograph, and it's more than just a single photo shoot, really. It's something that tries to deal in more depth, and it can be something that is relatively short in terms of time duration, but it can also last for a long time. And in the case of the one that we're going to look at here, it's lasted for many years, actually. But the other part of it is that it is looking at the world from a worker's perspective. And so this particular project I want to show you and talk about is about immigration enforcement, especially raids, but looking at enforcement as it affects workers. And of course, especially in the last couple of years, we've had nothing but enforcement and raids, but really the way it affects people at work is something that doesn't get nearly as much attention. And so that's what I want to talk about. And I covered workplace enforcement even from before the Immigration Reform and Control Act. And that was the law that was passed in 1986. And we know of it as the amnesty law because it had amnesty in it. But it also had a provision that was called employer sanctions. And employer sanctions is a section of the law that says employers may not hire workers without papers. And what it really does is it makes it illegal to work if you don't have papers. It increased the vulnerability of people without papers enormously, which is why people opposed it. And so I fought against that bill when I was a union organizer. And then when I started doing what I do now, started writing about it and taking photographs about it. And so today we're going to take a look at this kind of enforcement by looking at what was called, to begin with, Operation Vanguard. And if you had a chance to look at the articles that were posted in our first session, there were 2 of them in particular I thought that we might look at because they have a lot to do with what is and isn't a worker-centered project, or in this case, a worker-centered article. And the first one is from LA Times. And the LA Times looks at what happened in Operation Vanguard, which was this huge enforcement operation in Nebraska through the eyes of Mark Reed, who was the guy at the INS, which was the predecessor of ICE, who designed it. And so it's looking at the whole thing through the eyes of enforcement, really. And what it does is it upholds this idea that the purpose of the law is to punish employers and not workers. And this was one of the big lies about it. And so if you read the Nation article, which I wrote, what you get is you see how it happened, what happened if you were a worker. And so this is the worker that introduces that. And this is a woman named Concepcion Vargas. And I want to actually read how that article starts out because it tells you about her, but also about the kind of this way of looking at journalism and looking at the world. So it goes like this. Concepcion Vargas followed the migrant stream pioneered by her brother, Alfredo, who, after receiving immigration amnesty in 1986, set off across the country looking for a better job and higher pay than he could get in the sweatshops of East LA. It's like a chain, she explained. First one person comes and then they bring someone else. And we are all looking for something better because the situation at home is so bad that we can't survive. So for $6 an hour, she got work as a temp on a line processing bacon, ham, and cooked meat. And she says, they put me to work in a freezing cold room. I had to strip plastic bags off of big legs of meat, which were frozen and hard as rocks. I put them in a big vat, and after there were 100 or so, we filled the vat with water to thaw them. She began to freeze. She says, I got so cold, I asked permission from the supervisor to go to the bathroom. And when I left the line, I wasn't planning to come back. So I went upstairs to the bathrooms, but there my daughter's face appeared in front of me, and I heard her coughing all night. And I remembered how much we needed the money. So I didn't go to the bathroom and I didn't leave either. I just stood there crying, and finally I went back to work. So to the INS, Concepcion Vargas is the enemy, what's called a criminal alien, and prying her loose from her job at Iowa beef processors became the focal point of the Clinton administration's flagship operation for ending undocumented immigration, which was called Operation Vanguard. The state of Nebraska became a laboratory for testing a new strategy, which the INS said would remove the magnet of jobs. Now, this is a quote from that guy, Mark Reed, who was quoted at such length in the LA Times. Last December, the INS subpoenaed the personnel records for every employee of every meatpacking plant in the state. That is 40,000 workers. And then INS agents compared the Social Security number given by Concepcion Vargas when she applied for her job with the National Social Security Database. In 40 plants, they've sifted out 4,762 names. And then the INS sent the list of names to every company and to every worker a letter telling them to come in for an interview. So in Madison, which is the small town where Concepcion Vargas lived, at the IBP's plant of 1,051 workers, of them 258 got that letter. And one of them was Manuel Flores here. And he said since he had to quit his job because he was afraid to go to work, obviously. And he said that since quitting his job, he found a few days' work, but not enough to pay the bills. So he says, I'm really scared. We have nothing to fall back on, but I don't want to go back to Mexico because I don't know how we'll live there either. We weren't doing anything bad to anyone. I'm just trying to support my family. But if I don't work with bad documents, how can I work? We can't get green cards. If we could, we would. So this is basically trying to tell the story of this enforcement operation through their eyes. And of course, the photographs are trying to show who the people are that were the object of this, the so-called criminal aliens, in the words of the INS. So this project started when I went to Madison, this little town, to take portraits of families. I got a call actually from the AFL-CIO from this guy, Matt Finucane, who was working for the Asian American Labor Coalition, which had just started. And he said, you ought to take account of what's happening in Nebraska. So I went there and started taking photographs of workers, of Manuel. Here's another family, another family, another family. So in this little town of Madison, you wonder, okay, this was a town where everybody was white up until not too long ago. And so how did they react when a bunch of Mexicans began living in town here and working at the plant? And I got to know Stanley Cason, who was a priest. In fact, it was in his house that I interviewed Concepcion. And what happened was that the white church council for the church there wouldn't let Mexicans into the church school. And so Stanley Cason closed the church school and forced all of the children into the public school. And then I went to the public school and took photographs of these kids. You know, these are the kids of both the old-time white residents of the town and the kids of the meatpacking workers. And I just sometimes it's a trip taking pictures of kids. You know, it's like this one. It's like, you know, once they stop acting out for you, you know, and you really can see who they really are. Anyway, I began covering people as a result of what happened and what I saw in Nebraska, of people who were being fired and detained in other workplace raids. And, you know, after Clinton, we had Bush, and Bush just put that whole thing on steroids. And so one of the first places that there was a big raid was a place called Agri-Processors in Iowa, another meatpacking plant. And this is Maria Rosala Mejia Marroquin and her child. And she was, they arrested many workers in this plant. The men were all taken off for deportation, and the women, they gave them these ankle bracelets so they couldn't even leave the house. So the community, to give them credit, the community turned out for these workers and got them food so they wouldn't starve to death. And this is her with her her little child and her husband before he got deported. this is Anacleta Taj. These were workers from Guatemala, actually. These were Carnival workers. And here she is with her ankle bracelet and her son there. And they were, it was really brutal what happened to these workers. They were tried for deportation in these immigration courts in this stockade that they built with plywood in the local, you know, where they auction off the cattle. But in this town, it was really a town that was. This is the shows you a little bit of kind of like how decrepit that particular plant was. And then the plant was divided between, because it was a kosher plant, the supervisors and the management were people who came out from New York City, Jewish people. And so there was part of the town that was set up for them with their grocery stores. And then there was part of the town that was set up for the Mexican and the Guatemalan meatpacking workers. And so, just in terms of looking at the storefronts, you could see who was living there. Then after that, Mississippi, there was another big workplace raid there. And this is Judith Borboa, who was arrested in the raid in this particular plant, and then again released with the ankle bracelet to wait for deportation. I love this photograph just because you can see what she bought every possible toy for that baby, who was obviously way too young to be able to use any of it, just hoping against hope that that this baby will be able to grow up and use these toys.
Hi,
So,
David. Sorry to
yeah,
jump in. We have a few questions from Scott in the chat. He asked, what kind of legal support have they traditionally provided with? And also, he wanted to know if these are all photographs that you took.
if I'm sorry, what was the second one?
If these are all photographs that you've taken.
I still couldn't understand.
If these are all photographs that you've taken.
Yes. Well, that one, yes, these are all photographs. These are all my photographs. What kind of legal support? Well, in the agro-processors plant, the legal support came from the American Friends Service Committee. In the plant in Nebraska, and I'm going to go back to Nebraska in a little bit. I'll talk about the community organizing that took place there. In this plant, one of the things, and this is another worker, Angelica Omedo Paz, was that this plant was a mixture of African American and Latino workers. And so I got to know the organizer for, and it was actually a union plant, laborers union. And this is Frank Curiel on the right. And Frank, I knew from the farm workers union way back when. And he had gone to work for the laborers, and then he was the union rep for this particular plant. And so he was helping workers to figure out how to defend themselves. And here he's having a meeting with one of the community leaders there. But one of the most important things that happened in Mississippi was that these raids led to the formation of the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance. And Jim Evans here was at the time the head of the Black Caucus in the Mississippi State Legislature. He was an elected state legislator. He was also the AFL-CIO representative for Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. And he was the founder of the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance. So this is the only immigrant rights organization I know of in this country that was actually started and founded by Black people. And so it was obviously a coalition one, because Frank Curiel, whose photo I just showed you, was also an organizer with MIRA, as well as the laborers union. So it was a coalition organization, and they were the ones that came to the defense of those workers. And one of the things that happened was that the workers had to go to the plant to get their last paycheck. And so they were sitting on the grass outside the plant waiting for the company to come out with the checks. And it was shift change. And so workers started coming out of the plants, and they were mostly African American workers. And they came up, this is a story, I wasn't there, but as workers told me, that the African American workers came up to these Latino women who were sitting on the grass, and they hugged them, and they said, anything that you need, you just tell us what you need, what you want. We are here to help you and support you. So I really was very taken by that, and I wrote about that story a lot because it was about, racial solidarity in the face of these immigration raids. Um, from there, went to Tucson, and Tucson was a real site of immigration enforcement. And this is Francisco Mondaza, and he was a worker, one of those, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. It's one of the Asian fast food curry bowl or something like that, that uh, a fast food restaurant in Tucson, and he was picked up and held for deportation. And Tucson was also the place where there was a lot of protesting against the sheriff, who was actually the sheriff in Phoenix, Joe Arpaio, who was one of the world's class racists. And so, in covering the deportation of Francisco and how this was impacting people, I also wanted to take photographs of the protests, which were, and this is one of them, Arpaio is a terrorist, because Arpaio was sort of like leading the charge in Arizona of the of for these immigration raids and this, what was happening to workers here. So, and I wrote about this for different magazines. So even going back to the Operation Vanguard, um, I wrote about it for The Nation, and The Nation also covered this one here in Tucson. What happened in Mississippi, I wrote for the American Prospect, which was, these are, again, are sort of progressive, I wouldn't exactly call them left wing, but, maybe, magazines, but that would basically have a lot of interest in what was happening to working people and on these immigration raids. One of the most important of these efforts was what happened in North Carolina. And North Carolina, and Tar Heel, North Carolina, was the site of the biggest meatpacking organizing effort in recent history. And this was at the Smithfield plant in Tar Heel, North Carolina. And the United Food and Commercial Workers had a campaign that lasted for 16 years in order to organize this plant. And it had, as you can imagine, many, many stories back and forth and really terrible things that happened to those workers. But these are the hands to introduce it. These are the hands of Roberto Sanchez, who was detained in an immigration raid. And they had an immigration raid in which, like one of these I-9 checks, where the company had a list of 121 people and then said they were all going to be fired. And the workers actually struck against that. And they stopped the plant in order to kind of stop the raid. And then the INS upped the ante and they went down to the plant. And they just started picking people up for deportation at the plant itself. So it was an immigration war that was taking place in this plant. And one of the reasons for the organizing was the line speed and the terrible damage that it did to workers. And so I took a lot of photographs of workers' injuries. I couldn't obviously get into the plant. There was only one plant in the history that I've been able to actually get into. But I could certainly go and talk to the workers outside of the plant, which is what I did. And so this is Roberto Sanchez. And it wasn't just here. I started getting really affected by this way back in Nebraska and what was happening in Nebraska. This is a Tiberio Chavez, with this like contraption that he had to wear on his wrist because of the repetitive motion injury, which is one of the most common injuries for meatpacking workers. But there were lots of injuries. This is Abel Cervantes. This is a young guy. He was like, I think, 19 years old, and already he's injured for life. He would never be able to use that hand. He would never be able to make that hand into a fist after that. This is Edward Morrison, who was injured in his leg. And you can also see who's working in this plant. And this, combination of African-American workers and Latino workers, which is very common in the South. And that was part of the story, is what the relationship between these two groups of workers was. This is Jerry Bell showing us, how his finger got mangled in a machine in the plant. Marangeli Rodriguez. On this photograph, I tried to show that this is in a trailer, and this is a living room in her trailer, and that's the only furniture is the chair, the folding chair that she is sitting in. And again, this is sort of like talking about this is, this is what poverty wages in a meatpacking plant really mean. This is Nilsa Morales and her shoulder and her injury to her back and her shoulder and her neck. Quincy Harvey is showing us the operation that he had to have on his shoulder. Again, these are workers who were permanently injured and outside of the plant. That's why I was able to take the photographs. And finally, this is Rosa Marie Rodriguez. And I really, in this photograph, I not only wanted to show the injury and the operation that she had to have on her elbow, but the muscles in her arm. This is, I didn't want to turn workers into victims because I didn't see them as victims. These were people who stood up at work, who stood up for the union, which is one reason why they couldn't get their jobs back, but also who were, trying their best to kind of cope with these insane conditions of the line speed in this plant and the strength that you have to have as a worker to be able to cope with that. I wanted to just be able to show that and just in her arm and the way she's holding it. So there were portraits I took also of other leaders in this union campaign, and this is Lorena Gomez and her family again out in front of their trailer. And the Smithfield, what they did to workers is hard to imagine. They had a deal between the company guards and the local sheriff in which the company had its own jail inside the plant. And when they got angry at a worker, they would throw them into the company jail and then they would call the sheriff and turn them over to the sheriff. And that's what happened to Lorena Gomez was she was basically targeted because of her union support, very vocal union support, and thrown into the company jail. But they won. That's what was the most important thing, is that the unity of those workers between African American and Latino workers, after 16 years, they were able to beat this company. And I wanted to take photographs of the leaders of the leaders of this effort inside that said something about who they were and what was motivating them. And so this is Everildo Lopez, and this is the Mexican flag, and this is, kind of the national pride that he's showing, and part of what made him a union supporter, this sort of defiance. When I went to visit Vanessa McLeod here in her trailer, first, we were talking outside the trailer and about the union and the campaign, and then she invited me in, and I wanted to take a picture inside, and so we went inside, and there she is sitting there, and on her wall are who, right? Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X. Again, these are politically conscious, sophisticated workers. That's how come they could endure all of this for such a long period of time and finally bring the union in. And it's hard to show this in a photograph, so sometimes you have to sort of piece it together. But I also wanted to show kind of like what some of the conditions were that people were organizing against. This is the, typical trailer park living conditions for the workers in Tar Heel. And again, house along the main street there. A lot of the workers came from Veracruz, and there were so many people from Veracruz eventually in this part of North Carolina that, of course, then, people set up stores. And of course, what was the store going to be called? La Veracruzana, right? From Veracruz. And inside the store, here are the statues. It's sort of, again, these are culture photographs, looking at what the culture is of the people who are working in this plant. Who are they, and what do they think about it, and where did they come from? So, and this is another one. This is kind of what was happening to these small towns. This is a small town in Nebraska, actually, and here is the African store. And the African store being obviously a store that is there because of so many migrants from, in this case, Somalia, who are working in this plant. So anyway, I worked with the United Food and Commercial Workers. The photographs, I gave them the photographs of the injured workers for sure, and they used them in that campaign. But I also got a grant from the Nation Investigative Fund to go there and to spend some time there and do that. That's important because without that kind of support, where do you have the money to pay the hotel bill or the car or to eat? And then they were finally published in the Nation. And then after the union won, we published a really kind of deep analysis of what happened in that plant and why was it the union won. And we published that one in the American Prospect. So going back to Omaha and going back to Nebraska, um, after Operation Vanguard, a couple of years after Operation Vanguard, workers started organizing at one of the meatpacking plants in Omaha itself. And the organizing there, which goes back to Operation Vanguard, the resistance to Operation Vanguard and to the immigration raid came especially from two places. And one was the church in South Omaha, which is the Latino part of Omaha. And this is Father Damien Zerling on the right there. And on the left is Sergio Sosa, who's a remarkable person and who became a really deep friend. And I learned an awful lot from Sergio. And Sergio had been a seminarian and in a way a combatiente in Guatemala, and then had come to the US because he married an American, a white woman, and she was from Nebraska. So she finally convinced him to come to Nebraska. And he started up a worker organizing project originally when the Industrial Areas Foundation, IAF, that was called Omaha Together One Community. And then that eventually got transformed into the Heartland Worker Center, which is still the big worker center in Omaha. And
Hi,
so,
David. I'd like to
yeah,
just do a quick time check. It's
yeah,
4:32, and we also have a couple of questions and
okay.
comments. I'll share the first question from Scott. He asked, why did you decide to use monochrome for all of these shots?
To use which? Why
Uh,
did I?
yeah, he asked, why did you decide to use monochrome for
Oh,
all of these shots?
second one. Okay. And do you want to give me the other questions too, if there are other ones, so that we could kind of talk about them all? Or is that just one question?
And then another question from Stephen Pitts is he has a question about the relationship between images and text in a photo story.
Ah, okay. Well, why did I use black and white? I think because it has a certain emotional power that color doesn't, and that's what I was after. I was after a feeling of intimacy and emotional power. And you could argue that from the other way, and there are plenty of photographers who are really brilliant in color and can take photographs that have enormous impact in color. But in black and white, that's the medium that I feel most able to show what I'm trying to show. And again, it has to do with the intimacy. That's also why the photographs are as much as possible, as close as possible, because I'm trying to kind of get past your intellectual mind into your emotional one as well too, so that we're thinking and feeling at the same time. And black and white helps me to do that. So again, it's not a right or wrong thing. I don't think. I think it's just the way I function. Um, and then in terms of the how the photographs and text, um, I'm sorry that I couldn't just sort of put up a photo essay all, on its own here. I really should have tried to do that. But in each case, for instance, this is the union election. Let me show you the photographs here, because really what I did was I wrote an article, a long article that talked about the politics of South Omaha and Mexican immigration into Nebraska and what happened in this meatpacking plant and why the workers were able to successfully organize. And so it was focused on this particular election. And so a lot of the photographs that went with it were on the days prior to and just after the election. And so this is Sergio and Father Damien talking outside the plant there. This is Tiberio, who we saw because of his arm and that contraption thing. And this is the leafleting workers on as they're going into work one morning. And again, trying to show what the demands is or what the immediate situation is. The kill floor, which is where the cattle are actually killed. It's the leverage point in a meatpacking plant and fabrication. We are all united, every department in this plant. And then they would sing to the workers as they went in. So, I'm trying to again show and it's sort of like Mexican, I don't want to call it nationalism, but Mexican pride, I guess you would say. Looking at the serape that he's wearing as they're singing, as workers are going in. And this is just a portrait image about, are we going to win? Are we not going to win? What's going to happen outside the plant, of course. This is the morning that people are going in on voting day. And again, they're singing and chanting and shouting to the workers as the workers are going in, just trying to raise the level of animo there so that people will fight off the fear. And then here's what happened. And of course, they won the election. And this is Olga. And she was the basically the head of the union committee inside the plant, just so glad after the vote count, announcing the vote count. And then I also want to show her as a person. And so I had a photograph of her and her husband, who was another disabled worker, who you can just see from the way he's holding himself that his back is injured. And then I love this one just because this was the day that little toddler took her first steps without somebody holding her hand. And so it's getting into people's lives and being able to show, the ordinary life of people, what it's like for people. So this was a set of photographs that went with that article that talked about what had happened in that union election. And also, it wasn't completely a happy story because once the workers got into the union there, into the local, it was kind of a business union local. And workers were not very happy. They felt like they had got shut out of their own contract negotiations, and in some cases got pretty angry at the union. And Olga was one of them. And so in that story, there's also a quote from Olga talking about how she felt, so that we're not just sort of trying to present a false picture of everything. So anyway, I guess the answer is that in talking about this one particular organizing drive, which is a project within this larger project about enforcement, you build the picture from many different pieces. It's not one single iconic picture that shows you all of the story, and you need text. You need text to go with it, even though the pictures can be emotionally very impactful or moving. To understand the complete history of why they're there and what's happening here, you really need words. So I think words and images, they're very important. They go together, and you build this from a lot of different pieces. But what in the end is it that we're trying to show here? And I think for me, the answer is that we're trying to kind of help people step back. On the one hand, you're stepping into the story in the photographs, and the other hand, you're stepping back by looking at the context and not just sort of like appreciating what happened in that one organizing drive, but seeing overall, especially with the all of the raids and the firings that were going on, that we have a whole system in this country that is based on labor and exploitation. And each project is sort of a piece in that system. And so you publish them piece by piece by piece. There's the Omaha piece, there's the Madison piece, there's the Tar Heel piece. And so the individual projects taken together help to create this.
Hey,
And
David,
then,
we have a few really cool questions in the chat. You mind if I read them out loud for you real quick?
that's
So we
fine.
have, so first question from Fabian, I'm sorry, from Cynthia is there a technique that photographers can use to showcase the strength of leaders versus portrayed as victims?
Yes, there is. But one of them is like going back to this one. Okay. This is sort of partly what you can do is you can shoot from below going up. And what that does is it turns the word as well here. What we're looking at is Rosa Maria, and she's as big as the house. So you're presenting workers as big, physically big in the image and important. And then you're trying to put into the center of it the strength here. So that's, how you set up the picture and how you structure the image has a lot to do with whether or not your strength or weak. This one is a dangerous one because shooting workers from the up going down is, can also sort of make people smaller. But in this case, because you get close, you can get really close with a wide angle lens. you can focus on his face and his shoulder, and then what you get is you get the rest of life in and around him. So in this case, the porch of the house that he's living on. So that's part of it, is how you set up workers, but also showing workers in action. Again, all of the photographs that we're looking at um, during the union election. Whoops, whoops, I've been going the wrong way. Here where we see people doing things that are active. They're not just simply being victims. They are trying to change the world, really. And you can do this in a lot of mainstream publications like newspapers, LA Times or whatever. They don't like things in the image that have words in them. But I do. I think that sometimes it's very important to have words and text inside the photograph. And so in this case, you have words in here which are talking about what the workers want here. There's an election vote, yes, right? But also their tactic, the unification of the workers, unity. It's like you're really trying to get into the tactics of this struggle here within the photograph itself. Pardon me. So that's just a couple of ideas. I don't want to take up too much time if there are other questions, but I'm sure that you might have some ideas of your own, in which case, why don't you put them in the chat and we can talk about them. So what
Thank
do
you,
you
David.
have other questions here?
And I'll read the next few questions at once to you. So the question from Fabian, how long did you follow this story slash typical stories? How do you know when your documentation of a story is done? And then the next question by Najim, sorry if I mispronounced your name, but did some of the pictures and text run in local newspapers? Could the pictures be exhibited within the factory? And then our last question from Jeff, how do you establish the personal trust and permission from your subject workers to allow you to photograph them given the intimate and emotionally charged circumstances?
Okay, these are really great questions. And what I'm also going to do here is I just want to mention that there were a lot of missing pieces from this big picture that I'm trying to show you. And one of them was what happened to people in Guatemala that um, got them to leave home and become meatpacking workers in the US. So it's just a story of migration. And so what happens in people's communities of origin is as much part of the story. And so eventually I began covering that and taking photographs and interviewing people about that. And then also eventually the Bishop of Huehuetenango, who was um, associate of Father Romero or Saint Romero now, came to Nebraska to check up on his parishioners. And so I was his driver. And I finally got into a meatpacking plant because I was his driver and took some photographs in there, the only time I've been able to do that. And that's really important because it shows, the photographs show in some ways kind of like how brutal the work is. But that's also why meatpacking owners do not let you inside their plants with cameras to wander around taking photographs. So in any case, I just wanted to mention that those were two other pieces of it. And eventually what that led to were books, really. The oral histories, the interviews I was doing with these workers and the photographs of them both in Nebraska, and there was a section about California and in people's communities of origin. They got put together in a book that was called Communities Without Borders. And I can, with a little bit more time later at the end, maybe if we still have time, I can tell you the story about that book. And then there were other books also that talked about the system of exploitation. What is in capitalism? What is the system of migration, of displacement, and migration, and exploitation, and criminalization of people? Why is this part of capitalism, and how does it function? So I tried to also do political analysis, which wasn't really photographic at that point. It was just text. So the question, how long did it take? Well, the thing is, how long did which part of it take? The first time I was in Nebraska covering Operation Vanguard, that took about a week in Nebraska, and then the time spent writing and processing photographs after that. So I would say that was a month. Um, and about the same thing you could say for Mississippi. Um, in Tucson, I kept going back. Tucson's a lot closer, so it's easier to get to. And so each piece of this took its own time, its own set of time. And usually I had to stay someplace and go and visit people at home and talk to them and take their photographs, go down to the plant, cover what was happening in the community. All of that takes, multiple days to do. But then that's only the beginning of it, really, because you have to take the raw material that you're accumulating, the photographs and the interviews, and then you have to create what you're going to use them for. And in some cases, it's to write articles and to illustrate articles or to publish photo essays. And in the case of Tar Heel, I was just giving the photographs to the union, because I wanted to help the union win the election and win the campaign. And but all told, if we start from arbitrarily Operation Vanguard, I would say the project is still going on because, I just spent some time in Santa Maria taking photographs of the protests young people are making against immigration raids. And that has a lot to do with also covering farm labor in Santa Maria. And so it's a life for me, it's a lifelong thing. Um, I'm not saying that everybody has to devote their lives to every project that you're interested in doing, but I think that it helps if there's continuity in what you do. And obviously, I think that for all of us, there undoubtedly is. If we're here at a seminar sponsored by the Labor Center, we're all concerned about workers and we're all concerned about labor. So that is in its way a thread that goes through all of it. That means that the individual projects get eventually tied together and form part of something bigger. But how do you know when you're done? Well, the individual projects, you're done kind of when they're published. When The Nation published my article on Operation Vanguard, my investigation of Operation Vanguard was done, but that didn't mean that going to Omaha, Nebraska was done because I kept on going back there for the election at the Nebraska beef plant. I went there to cover the election when Trump got elected, to look at what was happening to meatpacking workers and immigration raids. So done is a sort of, there are places where you're done because you produce what it is that you're trying to the end product. And that's very important because after all, we're processing these photographs. Nothing comes out of the camera the way it's going to, the way you want it to be in real life. You have to work with the images. And the same thing, you have to work with the interviews and you have to work with the information that you're getting and turn it into a, a piece, a piece. And so it's done when it's published, but then not so done. How do I, exhibitions in the factory? Not in the factory, no. But in the community around the factory, yes. In fact, that can be really important. There was a gallery in Omaha, in South Omaha, called El Museo de la Raza, of big community institution, and we've shown photographs there because we want to be able to take this product and take the photographs and take the interviews and make them as much as possible interactive so that workers can look at them and they can talk about them and they can interact with them and they can tell you if they think that you're full of whatever. And so that there's this back and forth, and then so that they can be used. And so they get used in different ways. And part of what we're talking about here with the Worker Center Project is how photographs get used. I mean, next week, we're going to talk about it in terms of something else, the Mixteco and the indigenous communities here in California and Mexico. But they are used outside of work. I have yet to meet an employer that's willing to let me bring them in. But I don't think that that's the only way that we can have workers in a particular situation become involved with the photographs and use them and appreciate them and bring them. In fact, I think that's a very important part of it, and we have to keep talking about that. And then trust. Well, the trust thing is really because I don't work by myself. When I went to Nebraska, I didn't know at that time, but I had been kind of given the names of Father Damien and Sergio by other people. And so the first thing I did was I went over and talked to them. And then we developed a relationship, and that relationship made it possible for me to meet workers. They introduced me to the workers, and they were kind of like, in this case, let me tell you a story about this photograph here, because this one and the one before are the same woman. And at one point, Sergio and I went to Guatemala to interview the families and to talk to the families and see what the impact was of migration to Nebraska was having on people's communities. And so in this case, this is Emilia Juan Antonio, and she was the wife of a man named Lorenzo, and Lorenzo Francisco, who was a meatpacking worker in Nebraska. And that's how we met her. In fact, Sergio didn't know her, but we knew Lorenzo, and Lorenzo called his wife and said, hey, these guys, they want to talk to you, fine. So we went over there and we started talking to her. And pretty soon she was telling me, well, because I was asking her, wanted to start at the beginning of her life. Tell me your life story. Where are you from? What were your parents do? And so forth. And eventually, pretty quick, we got to the place in her life where she had met and married Lorenzo. And so one of the big struggles of her life was that she convinced him to stop beating her. And she began talking about that, and she began crying. And then I began crying, and Sergio began crying. And then so it wasn't just that. After she was describing that and her success at that, and then how it was inevitable he had to go to Nebraska. They could not survive if he didn't do that. And then he would send back money to build a house, but he wasn't there to build a house. And so she built the house. And then she became a midwife in this community. And then she had to convince, Lorenzo that being a midwife was an important institution in this community, and she was going to do it. And basically what she was saying, she told Lorenzo, hey, I'm going to do it, and you can like it or not like it, but this is it. And it was just an incredible story. And the most incredible part of it was that she was so honest about what she was saying and all these things that had happened to her. And we had just met her. And so what was the basis for that trust? And I've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it ever since. And part of it was, okay, yes, we knew her husband. We had good recommendations. Sergio was from that part of Guatemala. So we were kind of known, we were okay. But I think there's also part of it that as working people, we want to be able to tell our stories. We want to be able to say what's happened to us, and not just what's happened to us, but what we think about it, how we analyze the world. And the world does not pay much attention to us. And so sometimes when you have the opportunity to do that, you use it and you take advantage of it. And so I think this was part of it too, that she wanted to be able to say and analyze what had happened to her and the pressures of migration and the pressures of staying at home and all the rest of it. And I think that's very important. And part of that is also not just that kind of trust, but that we don't want to treat working people as simply the providers of raw material, the image, or, this is what happened to me yesterday. We want the analysis that people make of the world. And that's very important because I think actually that the way that migrant communities analyze the world system of migration is much more sophisticated and much more real than what you're going to read in most other places, let's put it that way. And so people are very good at that, but they have to be given the space in which that happens. And that's part of trust too, is that building trust means building the space in which you take very seriously what people think. And it's not just that you come with good recommendations, but that um, that you look and you listen really carefully and you listen truly, and then you also and it's changed me completely in terms of my own ideas and how I see the world because of that. So that's part of trust too. And in terms of time here, we are coming on up on the hour here. Are there more questions? Because I was going to show you a few more pictures and then we can get into your photographs and the people who have come here. So, Emily, are there more questions or
We did
Simone?
have one question from Scott, and he just asked if you are currently working on a project.
Well, I am. I'm working. I'm trying to get a book published that I've been working on for a couple of years. Publishing books with photographs is very difficult, and so this one's been much more of a struggle even than the other ones. And then also, I'm trying to pay attention to certain places geographically. Santa Maria. I've been going back and back and back to Santa Maria because I am very taken by what young people are doing there, which is that the demonstrations and the marches against um, the immigration raids and against poverty and calling for higher wages. Farm workers themselves, the parents of young people who are mostly undocumented, are really, including the whole family, they don't want people to get out there in the street where they can be grabbed. And so what happens instead is that young people walk out of the schools and they become the defenders. And that's impressed me. And so I've been going down there. And also I think that when people finally do get over the fear, that there's so much anger that's been built up that we're going to see some big labor actions going on in California against the kind of poverty conditions that people are being forced into. And Santa Maria is probably going to be one of those places where it happens. So that's what I'm doing. And these are just culture photographs from Santa Eulalia, the home of the marimba. They make marimbas there, but the only people with money to buy them are people who have migrated to Nebraska, and they export the marimbas to Guatemalan families living in the Midwest. And so these are ones about photographs of the impact of migration, the Game Boy, unemployed people waiting, kids with gang signs, the Cholo. LA, man, LA and Guatemala, right? And the massacres. He's telling us the story of the massacre. That it was really terrible in Guatemala, where the army just murdered many, many people. And then also good things. Here are women in the church meeting here of this parish council, and they are taking a role that they didn't do up until this migration started changing everything. And so this is just a photograph of this woman speaking up. And then the culture again. People try very, very hard to preserve their culture in the face of Coca-Cola, in the face of all of the, impact, and including what people bring back as migrants. So these are just the traditional things that happen on this, in this case, the Fiesta de Asunción. And then even in this is the most remote possible place that we could go to in the mountains near Santa Eulalia. And here's this guy, and what his job is they listen to the radio and they broadcast out to the community in a bullhorn what's happening in the world. And just
Hey, David, just a time check. It's 5 o'clock. I think it'd be a great time to begin transitioning to our panelists.
Yes, it would be very much so. And so I just want to leave it with one thing, and that is Um, talking about analysis, I'm going to read just a little bit of what Sergio has to say about migration because I think it is so important. And so this is Sergio Sosa, and he says, migration is not just a journey from one point to another. Migration is a form of resistance to empire. People from Europe and the US crossed borders to come to us and took over our land and economy, and now it's our turn to cross borders. Migration is a form of fighting back. We're in our situation not because we decided to be, but because we're in the US's backyard. Not only that, people have to resist to keep their identities and their communities alive. So we are demonstrating that we are human beings too. My conscience was born by seeing injustices every day, seeing the dead, and more dead. The U.S. was responsible for the coups that happened in Guatemala in 1944 and then in 1954. And our army was trained at the School of the Americas, and they would come back afterwards and kill our own people. Add to that all the money that came in, $2 million every 15 days, paid for by U.S. citizens. So the U.S. used its power and we buried the dead. But we are becoming acculturated. We learn other forms of living, and rich forms are lost. People from the North come back, and we look at them differently because they act differently. They send money, but years apart break up families. Those with remittances might be better off than those without them. But depending on checks from the North doesn't really give anyone a future, especially the young. They grow up thinking that the only way to have a future is to leave. So with that, leaving you with that, um, let us start giving a space here for those of you who have come with photographs to share them with us and talk. And so again, 3 to 5 images, give us 5 minutes to talking about them, and then we'll try and spend a couple of minutes with each person and give them some response to what you're showing us. So first up, why not Steve Pitts? Stephen, are you here?
I'm here, David. How you doing? These are phenomenal
You're good. So
images.
I have to stop sharing the screen in order for you to share.
That's
Sorry.
okay.
There we go.
Your images are better
Okay.
than my images. So hi, folk. I tell people that I want to be like David Baker when I grow up, basically. Okay. These are really great images, David. And very quickly, people can see that.
Yes.
So I'm Stephen Pitts, retired from the Labor Center up north, UC Berkeley, about 6 years ago. Did work around Black worker stuff and Black worker organizing, a lot of stuff, and got into photography during retirement. And my goal is still to be useful. So I want to tell stories through photography. That's why I raised the question of the link between text and images, because I think in words, but clearly you need to be able to think also through pictures. It requires a different way of looking at the world. I've been trying to do different projects, and what you see here is kind of a result of a morphing of a project. What I wanted to do, the original plan was to take this woman here, who's an activist and asked me 1399, and kind of tell a story 360, like around the clock, a whole worker perspective. But I didn't have really the capacity, both technically and creatively, to do a good job at that. So it kind of morphed over the year, and it turned into a broader project looking at kind of the relationship between union and community. The idea being that communities were important to really have a strong union itself. And so there are a lot of images to that. But I was asked for 3 to 5. David, I'm a rebel. I gave you 6, by the way, because I can't follow instructions very well. So let me show you the 6 here, and people can talk about them. So that was the main subject initially. So ask me, has over the years have series of strikes. You may or may not know that they're going to have a ongoing open-ended strike starting today, but UC settled, by the way. So it's kind of victory. This was at an earlier demonstration. Um, this is one of the chant leaders there. This is the signs they had clearly at the strike. But I shifted kind of into community mode, where you kind of see kind of the joy takes place in the course of picket line, people doing a line dance. I can jokingly say you can see there who can do it, who can't do it by their midgets themselves. Some are really good at the line dance, some are simply pretenders in learning, you might say. Um, and then that kind of closing, my 6th one, is simply that kind of the joy that's on the picket line itself. those are my images, David. That's
Well,
it.
thank you, Stephen. They're really wonderful images. And first of all, if people have something that they want to say about the images, um, can we do a hand raising and call on people, or would it be better to just have people do this in the chat?
For calling on the next presenter?
I'm sorry?
Was your question for calling on the next presenter or for questions for the
For
current?
questions for Stephen, for questions or comments about.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Why don't we drop questions in the chat? That should be easiest, or folks can raise their hand.
Okay, well, if somebody wants to read the comments in the chat, I can see one that just simply says, "These are great." You know, the ones I like best, Stephen, are, well, I like the ones like this, and then the two portraits where you get close to the people. You know, they really have, and that one, the one of the dance, the line dancing, just because people are doing something. But the one of the guy yelling, and then yeah, that one, and the first one I think is a really beautiful photograph. So
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed doing those. There are a lot of the guy chanting that were phenomenal, by the way. Just picked one to show.
so question, how do you make people feel comfortable approaching them with the camera? What's your technique?
A zoom lens, so I'm comfortable. Um, that's one of my challenges, by the way. My limitation, I tend to be shy in some arenas, and so I need to go beyond using the zoom, but actually get closer up. I think some of the ones that's probably more zoomed out. That's probably more zoomed out. That was relatively close. That if you think of a picket line, kind of an oval shape, I got inside itself, and so I was kind of inside the action, you might say, and that's why I got close to him. He was also inside. So you got to find your comfort zone, and I do think that Zoom's kind of are constraining, but also I love my constraints. Okay, so I need to kind of get beyond that.
Okay, well, you know, one thing about the about getting close is that you have to overcome your own fear in order to do it. You know, your fear that you're going to be rejected or you're going to feel uncomfortable, make somebody else uncomfortable in order to do it. But sometimes it's really important to be able to work through that as well too. So, um, okay, Steve. Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and also 3 cheers for 32.99 for having gone on strike and won whatever we hope that they've won. Okay, next up we have Joe Hakim, and after Joe we have Leopoldo Peña. So Joe,
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on here. Is it sharing screen? I just click the green button below.
Yes.
Uh,
Perfect. We can see it.
okay. I'm showing a few pictures from an exhibition or a project I did called Home Away from Home, A Little Palestine by the Bay. And it was an oral history project with photography, of course. With audio. It's a multimedia project. And that's why the QR codes are there. So you can actually listen to the voices of the people in the portraits. And the reason I did this project has been something I've been wanting to do my whole life, because growing up Palestinian in this country, you realize very quickly that you rarely got to speak for yourself. People always spoke about you. And so with this project, I was not just trying to uh, give a face to the Palestinian community, but a platform for them to be able to tell their own stories in their own words and even in their own voice. Um, so that was the idea of the project. And I was able to find people from a variety of locations, ages, classes, and because this area is the second largest Palestinian community in the United States.
can we
If
see any of them big? Can you
I'm
make,
sorry,
can you click on any of them and make it big?
bigger? I don't think so.
Oh,
I
okay.
could do that, but that doesn't get you very far. I didn't put up very high res.
Okay, they're really beautiful, especially the one on the upper right. It's just a beautiful portrait.
I'm not sure what you're seeing. Are you seeing
We're seeing 5 pictures all together with a list.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not you're supposed to see. You're supposed to see. Is
Oh,
that
there.
better?
Yes,
There
there
we
we go.
go.
There we go.
I thought you were seeing something else. That's why I said that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so
Oh, there we go. Nice.
I can connect us to a little bit of the audio if you'd like to hear some voices, maybe just a minute or something. Would that work for you guys? Because the point was for me is that hearing the voices gives the impact of what they tell you much stronger emotional feel, and maybe even makes it more relatable than just reading it on a page. And the fact that these people, some of them speak with accents, some of them are just as American sounding as I am. So, and that adds to what they're telling you. So let me
So
see.
give us a minute of one of the people.
One of them, yeah.
Can you click on the QR code and do that?
Well, I have it set up there. Let's see here. The sound will come through.
We grew up, it's like there is nothing but home. That's kind of like what we grew up with. Like there is nothing but Palestine, you know? So like if we don't go back home, where do we go? My grandmother is like 93 years old, and you would literally think she was 50 years old. She walks around, she brings out the horse, you know, she goes, wakes up in the morning, she goes and she lakat zatoon. She can't read and write for shit, but she would be able to tell you everything that has ever happened in the village to everyone inside of the land. When the British came, when Israel came, she knows everything. And you can't tell me that that history is fake, which they're trying to always do. Oh, like that history isn't true, like Palestine never existed. If it never existed, then why are we here? Why are we here?
Oh, that's beautiful.
By force, they came with their guns and said,
Okay, so you get a little taste of someone with an accent who actually survived the Nakba in 1948. So anyway, if I'm going to put a link to my website that has these things on it. If anybody, it's in the chat. If anybody wants to listen more and look at the other pictures, they're there. It's in the chat now. So anyway, yeah, if there are any questions or anything, shoot.
Well, a lot of good feedback, that's for sure. People really like. I guess if we're all reading the chat, we can all read what people are saying. But thank you, Joe. That was really beautiful.
Yeah,
I have to admit, I know them pretty well. I know.
Yeah.
But every time, still, it's like seeing them for the first time. So thank you. Okay, Leopoldo. And after Leopoldo, we have Vera Chang, if Vera's on the call.
Hey, David, how are you? How's everyone? Thank you for allowing me to share my work. My name is Leopoldo Peña. I live in Los Angeles, Southeast Los Angeles. I'm a Mexican immigrant. I've been in LA for 30-something years. So my work really centers around still trying to make sense of what it is to become an immigrant by approaching other immigrants who are doing a lot of great things. So I'm going to share a few images from a couple of projects that I'm working on. Some of them are series that I completed. Are the images showing on your end?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing one. So this comes from a series of documenting some of the performances in the Oaxacan or the Mexican migrant communities out of Oaxaca. And my interest here is to capture what parents are doing to get their children to take on the traditions or their culture. So this is one of those images. Where's the next one? So this is part of the same series, just going around the communities when they have events and finding people to photograph. This is out of another project that I did a few years back, chasing this game that comes from Oaxaca as well, but it's played throughout California. And this actually ended with an exhibit at UCLA a couple of years ago. And this is another this one comes from my series that I in Southeast LA. Southeast LA, just for reference, those are I live in areas where sort of repopulated in the 80s, 1990s by Latin Americans, predominantly Mexican immigrants. So I'm interested in generally interested in not just how people migrate, but how images migrate. So this photograph sort of captures those two. This is in South LA, so the mural of this image shows up there where Martin Luther King used to be. So it's just really, my interest is really capturing how immigrants make a living, how immigrants struggle, and how they just move around the city and how they go to work. Because very often that's what I'm doing when I'm taking these photographs too. This one here is in the Yellow River. This is a series project I recently completed. On the Yellow River, this is a section of the Yellow River that I visit quite often. And I wanted to capture it and really capture how people make use of the space. And this was the last one. This is an image of this is what keeps me going in my daily commute. So I'm working on photographing from the car. I'm going to work and capturing people as they're going to work. But this is one guy that this is where they live. And so I see them often or almost every day. So this is the image that kind of started that series. Yeah, so my interest is really into capturing the daily life of really workers and the community that I live in. So I'll leave it at that if you have any questions. Thank you.
Well, I have two questions, Leopoldo, and maybe you could put them back up there for a second.
Oh, sure.
So like the first one especially, I was really taken by that one because, you were saying that parents are trying to get their kids to get interested in the culture by using, I guess, cultural symbols that the kids themselves are already familiar with, in this case, like Mickey Mouse, right? And so I was wondering, does it work? What is this something that you think is really happening to people's culture, or is it just producing an amalgam of culture? Because I know that you took other photographs too of dance groups in LA that were kind of reinterpreting some of the traditional dances from people's communities in Oaxaca. So that was one question. And the other one was, a lot of the photographs are taken from car windows. They're the ones you have where you have the rear view mirror in the image as well too. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Why? What is it that is because
Well,
it's not
I
just an
started.
accidental thing here. This is something you're doing.
No, it's intentional. I started with an interest in sort of like photojournalism. Then I kind of played with street photography, and I developed a project using sort of like the technique of strategy of doing street photography. But I felt that I was placing myself kind of artificially on the street, and I wanted to still capture what happens on the sidewalks, what happens on the street, but more from the like the what is my positionality in the street? I'm in a car. I'm going somewhere, but I wanted to capture that. At least move away from the wandering around back and forth on a sidewalk where I can see photograph the place that I recognize as general community, but photograph it from the perspective that sort of it's kind of I don't know what word to use it, the honest perspective where I'm not positioning myself to capture something that is in line with some kind of genre in photography. I just mean, this is how I see it. This is how I live it every day. So let me put that camera so that it's aligned with my own experience of the place and the people that I'm looking at. I hope that answers it.
Yes, well, even more questions, but other people.
Sure, there's a Tiliche one in the series. I have it on, I believe it's on my website. I photographed them I think it was a year ago. And yes, I'm using film for most of this stuff. I'm still using film, except for this one, because this is a sport, so I really couldn't afford to use film because I was taking a lot of images. But this is digital. The other ones are film.
So I remember seeing that whole show on the UCLA campus.
Oh, here, yeah. Okay, this is yeah, but this one. Thank you, Scott.
Well, thank you, Leopoldo.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So, Vera Cheng, are you here with us? Yes, you are. Okay.
Thank you, David, for this powerful and critically important workshop and for inviting me to be part of this inspiring panel. My name is Vera Chang. I'm a social scientist and an investigative reporter and professor of environmental justice and sustainability at St. Mary's College of California. And before showing my images, I just want everyone to notice what comes to mind for you when you imagine our country's agricultural landscape. So maybe you're envisioning hardworking farmers or landscapes dotted with barns. This American imagery is deeply rooted, dating back to Jeffersonian ideals, and today remains embedded in modern understandings of agriculture and corporate branding of quote unquote sustainable foods. And nowhere is this idealized notion of agriculture more pronounced than in Vermont, where my photographs take place. So these photos are part of a long-term collaboration that I've had with a Vermont-based dairy worker-led human rights organization, Migrant Justice. And for over a decade, I've been working alongside migrant dairy workers through community-engaged documentary photography and action-oriented research. And what I'll show you are all environmental portraits of the workers, who are mostly young men originally from dairying regions in Guatemala and Mexico. And together with these workers, we've created these photographs with the goal of countering dominant agricultural narratives and imagery, which have historically excluded migrants despite their central role in our society and our economy. Importantly, my research and photography is all worker-led, meaning that workers guide what should be photographed and directly how these images are used. So these images aren't simply about workers, but they're co-created with them in service of their political struggle. To me, this image juxtaposes a bucolic landscape with the way that it portrays workers as both invisible and encerrado, meaning enclosed, like in prison in their workplaces. Because much of Vermont falls within 100 miles of the border, ICE patrols the region, and of course, brown bodies are highly visible and at risk of deportation. And while attention on workers' vulnerability is heightened now, ongoing arrests and detentions have been an ongoing issue for Vermont's dairy workers, with human rights leaders being targeted in particular. Here is an image of a worker corralling cows for milking. And to me, this is about a representation of labor issues that forces workers to be perpetually in motion, often working in upwards of 14 hours a day, 365 days a year, without enough breaks to use the bathroom or even to sleep. And living under such intense isolation, the problems facing workers have remained largely invisible. To name just a few other issues, through my research, I would hear of issues of diagnoses of cancer likely caused by chemicals at work, homes that were unheated during Vermont's bitter winters, and workers paid below the minimum wage. And importantly, and aligned with David's work, the images that the workers and I have created don't just reveal problems, but also workers' solutions. I took this image after the migrant justice workers received its first corporate support in 2015 and was on the cusp of launching its then new dairy worker-led human rights program, Milk with Dignity. Milk with Dignity is the first major adaptation of what's known as the worker-driven social responsibility model, also known as WSR. Worker-driven social responsibility was created by a group of tomato pickers in Southeast Florida, where until recently, modern-day slavery plagued the fields. This model is by and for workers, and with robust multi-pronged enforcement mechanisms, it has become a solution to otherwise ineradicable rampant abuse. And as a testament to the workers' vision, since Milk with Dignity was implemented 8 years ago, it has redirected over $5 million directly into workers' pockets, and the program has handled over 1,600 calls on its 24/7 worker support line that's resulted in the resolution of over 600 documented violations. This final photo of a migrant justice worker marks this changing history. So despite the risks of speaking out, workers have done so because they felt that like the risks of hiding, like invisible subjugation and isolation, were even greater than striving on, like the worker pictured here. Since I published this image of the worker, it's been widely used to symbolize both the dangers of the dairy industry and its potential for change. And the photos that I've shown have often been used by workers in their own reports and campaigns as evidence of their working conditions changing. And these images have also been disseminated to news outlets. And by being disseminated widely, the images can help reorient the public towards bottom-up responses to complex social problems. And as the photographs are produced and reproduced, they enable workers not just to reclaim their own stories, but also reclaim history. So thank you so much. Walking alongside these workers in their struggles for liberation has been a privilege of a lifetime for me.
Thank you, Vera. That's really impressive photographs. They're really, especially because, cows are a lot bigger than people. And so you sort of take advantage of that in the photographs in a way of like kind of your eyes go back and forth between the animals, and also the caging of the animals. It sort of makes you feel that the workers are caged in the same way that the animals are. It's like a industrial, for agriculture, it's very industrial images.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Anybody else want to chime in here? I see a lot of comments in the chat. Very good. Well, thank you, Vera. That's really, really wonderful images. So Alessandros Aboafash, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly, but please show us your images.
Yes, hello. Thank you, David, for such a great session. These series are really exciting, so it's great to be a part of it. These are the photos that I would share. Can everyone see
Yes.
images? Okay, so I realized throughout this presentation that this one is mainly a worker-related photograph, while the two other ones that I plan to share are more revolutionary, referring more towards the first series. This is a photo that I took in Syria in 2024. It was the first time that I went back. It's where my family's from. The first time I went back in 15 years. And this is a lady who lives not too far from my grandparents' home. And everyone saw me with the camera, and it was like very interesting to document the village and seeing it in an adult perspective for the first time. And so when I went to go photograph this image, I realized the situation, and I had gestured for the lady in the back to be a part of the group photo, and she seemed very shy and began to kind of sit and do what was pictured here. And I found this very interesting, and I read into it and how many refugees, end up going to places like Syria to find work and become, housemaids and try to provide for their families. And it's a very interesting thing to see because, Syria within itself is going through a humanitarian crisis, and many people are struggling and relying on other family members to kind of provide. So it's a very interesting cycle, and witnessing that, and kind of just the way that the image is presented here is very, very intriguing to me. And then this is the second image. This was a Palestine protest in downtown. This was, I think, one of the major ones that happened about a year, almost 2 years ago now. And I was kind of just in the front line here before they started to march and just realizing that there are a lot of heavy feelings happening here. And then this was a most recent protest related to what we're going through right now and ICE, anti-ICE, and I didn't realize it while taking the photo, but after the fact, realizing that that one officer's straight in the middle, just kind of angrily staring, and one of the few people who have a clear image of their face. But yeah, these are my photos, and thank you so much for giving, us photographers an opportunity to showcase our work.
Well, thank you, Alison. And do you want to say anything about the connection between the first photo and the last two?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that here let me share this time. Yeah, I think it at first I'm, like I know in the beginning I'm mentioning that like maybe there isn't really much of a correlation, but all of this does have to do with kind of how our world is and how we are operating in a system that is oppressing many people, and no matter where you're from, kind of just reaping those consequences of trying to sustain your life and build, and finding difficulty no matter whether it's in Syria or in, the United States.
So do you see the second two images as being in a way movements and protests against what you see in the first one?
Yeah, I definitely can see that. That's a very interesting perspective too, thinking about that more.
Thank you so much, Alison. These are really wonderful photographs. I really appreciate your showing them to us. So next up is John McCurley.
I believe John is working on
Oh,
signing out and signing back in as a panelist.
I saw that.
So if we
Okay,
wanted to give him some time, we could jump to the next person and come back.
sure. How about Eric? Eric Guerra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good.
I'm
Let's see.
going to share my screen. So I think my photos are a bit different in that I'm not necessarily a photographer, like as my title. I do communications for the Inland Empire Central Labor Council. It's kind of like the Los Angeles Federation of Labor, but just for San Bernardino and Riverside counties. So a lot of the work that I do is sort of documenting different worker actions, strikes, rallies. This specific first image was from was from the January 28th shutdown in solidarity with Minneapolis. And it was sort of done in solidarity, especially in our region. There's been a lot of ICE raids. And as the Inland Empire is the logistics hub for the entire country, um, Amazon has a huge footprint here. And these are some Amazon workers, Amazon Teamsters specifically, who are really just mobilizing against ICE. And they've taken a really strong stance against ICE across the Amazon Teamsters. And this next image is that of a recent other Amazon Teamster picket line in Harupa Valley. Um, I just selected this one because I know the organizer and she's a really, really great organizer. And I just really appreciated how the light was sort of framing her face specifically and how you can see the rest of the workers. I'm sure you can see some like trucks around here. There was a really long line of trucks, Amazon trucks specifically, going all the way back to the freeway because of this picket, which was kind of in response to a lot of retaliation that Amazon was doing still. And this photo is of two members of the IE Black Worker Center during May Day in San Bernardino. And it just really stuck out to me because the a lot of other organizations, they had like more modern sort of banners and signs, but they had one that was very nostalgic and but all of it is still really relevant today. And yeah, I just found it really powerful to see them two marching with it. I sort of enjoyed where how the framing of the photo is as well. And then this photo is similar to Stephen Pitts, is also of AFSCME 3299. It's at UC Riverside. And again, like I stated, I mostly do sort of like just documenting, because for a long time our region was underinvested and still is with like labor photography and labor journalism. And folks usually come over here from Los Angeles or other parts of the state. So it's like important. It was important for us to like have the sort of localized documentation, and it was really my foray into photography more. So doing the documentations. And then this last picture is of a Unite Here Local 11 picket line in Ontario. Um, again, me and the team and my colleague Frankie went out to go document this picket line, try to get some videos, just do general coverage. Um, and I selected this one just because I like how you can see the emotion on the gentleman's face. And I I like to think that you can almost hear this image because if anyone's ever been to a Unite Here picket line, it is extremely loud. When folks want to do a disruption, they do a really strong disruption. So yeah, these were the five images I selected. Open to any questions as well.
What do you do with the images there?
Typically, we'll post them on our social media pages and also share them with our affiliated unions. We kind of act as a support communications team because a lot of the unions, they don't necessarily have communication staff. So it's really to just document it on our own social media pages because there's not a lot of local journalism that would do it for us. So we really have to do it ourselves.
Do you have Photoshop or any image manipulation software in your computer?
Yes, I have Lightroom. I think it's
Lightroom,
yeah.
okay. You know, one of the things that you and other a couple of the other photographers here might think about doing is looking at how you can change the contrast in your photographs using the tools in Photoshop and Lightroom. So that because if you do that, first of all, you can get more detail in the shadows there. You see, you're impressed by the emotion in his face. And if we could see his face more clearly, it would show it more. So if you use those tools where you can give us more detail in the shadows. And on the other hand, you can also tone down the highlights so that you get a smaller range of contrast in your photographs. And because they're very powerful, especially, you know, like I agree with you, you know, the emotion on his face and then the person on the left as well too. And so since those are carrying the photographs, that might the photograph, it would be good to be able to kind of bring them out more.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you so much.
Sure. Beautiful. Great work. And also great use of them too. Getting them out into the world, that's a big achievement. So, John McCurley, also we have a request from Chris to share photographs, and I think we'll have time for that. We have still 20 minutes, so I think we're doing okay here. So, John, you're up next, and then Chris, if you're ready, you can go after John.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I actually also use the I want to be David Bacon when I grow up. David and I was an oral historian before. I worked at the University of Iowa Labor Center, and so these are for 10 years, and so these are from a variety of different projects. So this is from one that I worked on with the Library of Congress. It's what I think of as the best environmental portrait that I've taken, the sort of classic placement of worker within the shop. So this is Charlie McAllister, who is well, he's done a lot of things, but in the late 70s, early 80s, he worked at WABCO, which was used to be Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, and was part of a largely forgotten but important United Electrical Workers strike that took place at WABCO right on the heels of the PATCO strike. And so I went out and did some interviews with some of the participants in that strike, and this was the best of the photographs that came from that. And as David knows, I started as an oral historian, capturing stories, and as an audio producer, and I increasingly realized that I wanted to have photos that matched the quality of the audio in the stories. And as I say, this is an example of me getting better at that. And again, that led to trying to take pictures that didn't necessarily involve people. So I live in eastern Iowa, which also has these echoes of the stories of the meatpacking and agricultural revolutions for workers and the environment. And this is an example of, again, my efforts to try to capture the sense of the factory in the field, the way in which Iowa, if you were to drive around it, would give this sense of kind of bucolic landscape. It likes to sell that. But in truth, it's one of the most transformed by human hand landscapes on Earth, and all for private profit for the most part. And so again, here this was an effort to try to capture that tension in one photograph. This was a photograph, a series of portraits that I did from a project with a UAW local in suburban Des Moines. It was a series working with participants in the John Deere strike from 2021, trying to understand the roots of that strike. And one of the things that came along with that was recognizing how profoundly diverse this local was. This is this is a worker who had come to Iowa out of a military career, but he was from Mississippi, from the border between Louisiana and Mississippi, and he had you can see it represented in the feather indigenous roots as well as Black roots, and all of which was important to him. So this was an effort to try to, in a fairly conventional portrait, to try to capture as much of who he was as I could. And this is one of my most, sort of frankly, David Bacon-ish photographs. I was very inspired by David's photographs from the U.S.-Mexican border. And this is a photograph from Ottumwa. It was a building that I drive by on my way to and from work as a NEA organizer. And again, it's mostly in browns in color, but in black and white, it really pops. And again, I won't tell you the whole story here, but I finally saw this day where there was a group of workers working on the top of the building, and went out to take the photograph, and ended up with this conversation with the African immigrant who now owns the building, who was very suspicious of the guy who was out taking photographs of his workers. But again, I'm very specifically here trying to mirror David's work. And then same here in the sense that, again, I learned a lot from David's use of angle and perspective. This is a group of Teamsters, young Teamsters, who were striking at a soft drink plant, also in Ottumwa. Again, it's known for being a meatpacking town, but it also has a John Deere plant and a Dr. Pepper plant. And again, luckily, I had long contacts with the Teamsters, so I was able to roll up and say, "Hey, do you mind if I take photographs?" And the coolest part about this was that this is a group of second generation workers, right? Black, Latino, white. and it was as much a party as anything else. And so I wanted to capture this notion of them kind of, again, being, as David said, sort of larger than life and sort of walking into the future together. So again, those are all the photographs, but again, just trying to show a variety.
Well, thank you, John, and I really appreciate all the kind words. And we could talk about it more, but we now have two people also who want to share. And so we do have time for two more. So why don't we see first from Chris Cruz. Are you ready to show us your photographs?
Yes, let me, what is it, the share button?
Yes.
All right. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I guess just a little bit of brief context. I'm originally from East Los Angeles. I typically say the East Side, right? So that incorporates like Montebello, East LA, Boyle Heights. And a lot of the photography that I've done has been like street photography, street portraiture, I guess like urban landscape. I don't work as a photographer. I would love to, right? But I currently work as a program manager here in Sacramento for a rapid rehousing program where we work to rapidly rehouse homeless families. But this is some of the work that I've done in the last 5 years. So here we have a street portrait and a street photograph of, you have these workers right up top of the Bank of America. And then you have the gentleman, the street vendor down below. And I just kind of was walking, typical like day at this time, just walking and taking street portraits. And I just kind of saw all this happening at the same time. And obviously the words of America, stood out to me. And I was just, as I walk around, I try to like frame images before I actually raise the camera. And to me, it's just like these people are of America, of the Americas, right? And so I just wanted to capture that. And yeah, I really um I don't know, was happy with I guess the results, afterwards. A little tiny bit of cropping, but yeah, that's how that came together. This is in Boyle Heights on Cesar Chavez Avenue. I'll go on to the next image. This is a photo I took. I was at a protest in Echo Park. People that I were with were protesting the local council member who was participating in the parade. I asked this young lady if I could take her portrait, and like as I was taking her portrait, a street vendor, was walking by, and then behind them, it's a little out of focus, but behind them is like a stereotypical like gentrified business, right? And obviously the messaging in her sign, I love, she's wearing the keffiyeh over her head. But there's also something about there's the dog logo in the gentrified business in the background, and then there's the little street dog with the gentleman. And so you kind of have like this like gentry, dog in the background, but like the actual like dog right here down below. So anyways, let's see, go on to the next one. And kind of like in the theme of like gentrification and displacement, and with urban landscape, I try to take photos of like, again, East LA, Ball Heights of like of buildings, because oftentimes these buildings are here one day and then they're gone the next. And so this is kind of like two in one, that I shared for social media. You have the market down below in 2020, and then 2024, the building was demolished. And there was a lot of like activism um, trying to prevent it because of what they were going to build in its place. Um, at the time, there was a lot of like disagreements with Karen Bass and some of her executive directives that she had passed that kind of like overstepped um, community engagement from stopping the project in the name of housing development, right? So anyways, the image below was used a lot by a lot of the activists and organizers as a way to be like, just as a way to bring attention, to what was happening. Um, this image here is so with photography, sometimes I've experienced there's an image that I want to take, but I'm unable to take that image, right? And so when I think about Ruben Salazar was a reporter with the LA Times. He was shot and killed by the East LA sheriff during the 1970s Chicano moratorium. Um, Ruben Salazar is seen as a martyr for the Chicano movement. But for me, I guess I had this feeling of like, why Ruben didn't want to be a martyr, right? Ruben wanted to live his full life. Ruben wanted to retire. Ruben wanted to spend time with his children. So I created this fake newspaper in a sense where the headline is Ruben Salazar retires, culminating 40-year career. The paper is dated 1998. And so I felt like I needed to create this image in the name of like Chicano futurism, where like this alternate future exists where Ruben Salazar was able to live his full life and not have to be a martyr, um, just because I don't know. I just think he deserved that in some way. I asked my friend if she could hold the newspaper and just kind of come with like a 90s, late 90s aesthetic. Um,
Chris,
la-
could you do one more minute? And then we have two other people after you, and I want to see if people are willing to stay
yes.
so that we can have the final two people here.
Yes. And then last one, it's a photo of she's the aunt of Anthony Vargas. Anthony Vargas was shot and killed by the East LA sheriff. The sheriff claimed that he had a gun on him when they did the fingerprints for that weapon that was supposedly on Anthony Vargas. It came back without his fingerprints. Um, this is a portrait of her jacket that she made, Fuck the East LA Sheriffs. This image got a lot of attention on social media at the time, and I kind of wanted to do something with the image so that it could exist outside of social media so it would be accessible to other people. Long story short, I turned it into like a silk screen and then we pasted it throughout East Los Angeles. Yep, that's everything.
So
Thank you.
thank you, and I really regret that we don't have more time because juxtaposition, you've really done some very interesting things with it. So maybe next time we'll talk about it a little bit more at the beginning of the next one. But let's at least give our last two people. So Chris Turley and then Alina, I'm really sorry that I didn't have your name, but we do want to see your photographs. So let's stick around. And Chris, let's go with you. And then Alina, let's see yours after Chris.
So I think we'll start with Alina because
Oh,
we've
okay,
been
that's
having some
fine.
tech issues tracking down Chris's photos. And he's been gracious enough. He says, let's pass. The photos here are so impressive. I'm floored by the images. So Alina, I believe you should have screen share permission now.
Yes. Hello, I'm from San Diego, born and raised. I am a multidisciplinary artist. Currently just finished doing my BFA at Cal State Long Beach, and most of my images are based and revolve around queer joy. And I believe that I am blessed and have the opportunity to be in spaces where a lot of people are not. So I believe that a lot of images should have soul in them and respect everybody and have the opportunity to be around others when a lot of people do not have the access and um, spaces to be themselves. And then I did decide to pick two different series. Recently, I started doing this series in my family's garden. The ones that are going to be next, they were shot on 4x5 camera. And then I printed them in the darkroom. And I do play with a lot of different types of cameras. One that is really tiny, especially for the first one, it's a little tiny Olympus, tiny little 4 megabytes, because I want something small that a lot of people can't really see and that they can't really hold and put their guard up, and that they are just free and have a flow type of body movements. And that's it. Thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed hearing your words and a lot of the conversations that we've been having here.
Thank you, Alina. And I also want to say that at the start of our last session next week, we'll have space for talking about what we've seen here. So I think that we're cutting the time short, but I think that we should have more time for it, because I think
Yes, of course.
there's important things to say about it. So please don't feel like this is the end of that discussion.
I'll be at the next one as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Chris Turley, you are the last one here.
I think our last person is going to be Peg Hunter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Peg, if you're ready to screen share.
Oh boy. I'm not sure I'm getting this here.
There should be a share button at the bottom middle of your screen. It might be green, it might not, but it's like a little
Yeah.
square with an arrow pointing upward.
All right, let me try it again. Should I share settings or share from toolbar? I'll try that. Let's see if that works.
Oh, I see. Don't click the tiny, I don't know how to describe it. There's two arrows. I see that you've clicked the really tiny one. Click the arrow inside the box.
All right. I'm sorry. Now it's gone away. I don't see that share option anymore.
Do you see raise hand or host tools?
Yep, I see raised hand. I see more. Let's see
Okay, look to the left. There should be one that says share and then click the word share.
Okay, let's try that. Yeah, it's
Actually, Peg,
not
I may
liking it.
have, I believe I have a copy of your photos, so let me see if I can pull those up really fast.
Oh, that would be great.
Let's see. Or Maisha Simone, are you able to find them? Sorry, it's taking me a minute. All right, actually, here we go. So you have 5 photos. I hope it's okay if I share them a little bit out of order,
That'd be
just
great.
because they came up.
Sure.
All right, can folks see?
Yeah. Would it actually be possible to start with the group of 4, like keep going? That one. Okay. I'll try to keep this super quick. About in 2019, a delegation went to Honduras to look at root causes of migration. And these pictures, 4 of them, are taken in the northern part of Honduras, in a community that is fighting environmental issues. A huge mining commission was granted above the water source for many communities, and this is the Guapanol community. And the man talking, his name is Juan Lopez, and I will say more about him later. The woman to our right is Juana Esquivel, and more later on her also. So maybe go to the first picture now. Not the other one. Beck, keep going. Keep going. Yes. So this was taken at the Guapanol River. The community is standing behind me and our delegation also. And the families were playing in the river. They had basically the army had kept them from their river for quite a while. They were scaring them. They were threatening. There's death threats. And the army showed up while we were there. And this man just leaned down and grabbed a handful of water and looking at the army. It's like, this is our water. And I just was so impressed with how visually, you don't get a chance to tell a story like this often. So if you can go maybe one more, that one. This is just a close-up of this army that was paid for by the U.S. It's trained and funded as a counterinsurgency by the U.S., part of security forces. And next one. This is our meeting with the governor of this district, responsible for the military, etc. The woman on the right, on the left, is Juana Esquivel from the panel photo. And you'll see he's got a Israeli flag. No Honduran flag, he's got an Israeli flag. And when asked by a rabbi in our group why there was an Israeli flag, he said, "Oh, it's because we appreciate the humanity, the human loving kindness of the Israelis." And anyway, I guess keep going. To the last one. Yes. So the original photo was of a panel. Juan Lopez was telling us about the history of the mining and the destruction and threat to their water source. And this is from a little over a year ago. This is a celebration of Berta Cáceres, the 9 years since she was assassinated for her environmental work. And you'll see Juan Lopez's picture is right next to her because he was assassinated last year. And so it's just trying to put together this story visually was really, really interesting. And it was really great to be able to stand with those communities a bit. And too much to talk about, but I'm going to stop now.
Got a real series of photos that tell the story for sure. And you see the soldiers, and then you see Juan Lopez was killed. Yeah. So it is now a little after 6. Do we have one more person that wants to share? Chris Turley? No.
I think David Chris had said he would wait and maybe we could do that on the 21st. But yeah, I think we can close and invite everybody to come on the 21st. We will have a meal together and David will be in persona at the Downtown Labor Center, 675 South Parkview. But close it out, team. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Especially those people that brought their photos. Thank you.
I don't know, Simone, if you want to have any final words from our comms team. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate everyone's participation, thoughtful insights, and really truly enjoyed folks that shared their photos today. But yes, we will be sending a post event email that will have a link to this recorded session and other information about our final workshop next Thursday. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you again. Hope to see some more photos of yours next up.